you were the second fastest person on Medium to get 50,000 followers after Barack Obama. So you left uni and then you went to a tech consulting job. Why tech?
The thing is, my job title was business consultant. I didn't properly look into the company, I guess, at the beginning. And I didn't realize how much tech would be involved. They don't necessarily enjoy their job or they don't want to do their job forever. But because they don't know what they want to do, they just keep cruising along. It was so much stress and so much sleepless nights and me doubting myself. And it took me months from the idea, maybe it was in November 2020, okay, maybe I could do this full time. In February 2021, I took a week off. I said, this is the week that I'm going to make the decision.
I think most people are scared to leave their job because they do not believe in themselves.
My dad was always like, just quit, you'll work it out. Like, he's like, I believe in you, like, you'll be fine, right? And I was like, well, what about this? But what about security? It's almost the roles reversed. It didn't bother him at all. And it was such a massive vote of confidence that I don't know if he wasn't like that, if he made it difficult, or if he...
Firstly, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. We had a nice conversation just before starting the podcast, and I want to start the podcast off by kind of asking this question of like, when you were growing up, did you ever imagine of being someone, or did you have a vision of being something?
It's funny because when I was a little kid, like 6 years old, I used to write stories and I thought, oh yeah, I want to become an author one day. And that was my ambition from say, when I was 6 until 9. And then I just forgot about it. And I had no idea because I did the traditional thing, right? My A-levels were biology, chemistry, economics, and maths. So I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was thinking, okay, I can either do medicine route, pharmacy, whatever like that, or go down the business route. So it was very traditional, right? I just thought, okay, I'll do the standard thing. And I never thought that I'd run my own business or do my own thing. It kind of all happened accidentally. And so much of it was just following the path in some ways, right? It was good at school, studied hard, got my good grades, went to university, but I didn't know career-wise what I wanted to do at all. I just even the thing of me sitting here talking on a podcast and having my own podcast, I didn't think I'd ever have the guts to do that. I was that little shy kid in the back who, one-on-one, I don't shut up, but I'm not the kind of person in a classroom to dominate it and be the joker and shout out loud, which is what you might expect from somebody doing what I'm doing.
I think one thing which I really liked there was that the fact that you didn't know what to do in life when you were in school. And I think a lot of people, including me, I didn't know what I wanted to become or do in the future. So I just went to the uni route. Is there something you would do differently if you were back in school now, thinking about the career path you would get? Because I feel like many people listening to this might be in that position and they're like, what should I do?
It's funny because the only reason I am who I am is because of the different decisions I took.
Yeah.
And the tough thing is, because I ask this question sometimes as well, and it's a cop-out to say that, because the path, for example, even the things that didn't go right. So with Cambridge, right? I went to try and get to Cambridge. There were 60 applicants for that college. They took on 8 people. I was 9th. So I was that close, right?
Oh, wow.
But my life would be totally different if I went to Cambridge, and it would have made me a different person. But the problem is I kind of like who I am now.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that route, if it might have seemed more prestigious at the start, but it might made me a different person. And I guess what I tell myself if I was younger, though, was I was so worried about everything all the time. And I used to stress about everything. I used to worry about what people thought of me. I used to worry about grades. I used to worry about the future. And you look back on it, none of that stuff really mattered.
Yeah.
Like how many of those people that I was so worried whether they liked me or not, I'm even still in touch with today. And even just the whole thing about everything, right, is I put so much pressure on myself. I still do in some respects, but I put so much pressure on myself that things that just aren't important.
Yep.
And what I guess I have now that I didn't have 15 years ago, it's just that belief that I'll work stuff out, right? Like things will go wrong. You can't control that always. But now I know there's no point in me spending all my time worrying about that because that's not going to change anything. I just try to really take on what I've got in front of me. And sometimes it causes problems because I'm like, that's a problem for next week, somebody, not for today's.
Yeah.
But I think the attitude has made me much happier.
I like that a lot. And I like when you said that looking back, all the things you thought about people might think this, or like your classmates think this and that. One thing I always told myself is that I'll tell my kids that don't worry about anything, because when you're in like secondary school and just in school, you will look back and you'll be like, why did I really give a damn about all of those stuff? And so I love that part a lot. You applied at Cambridge. Which university did you go?
Bath.
Oh, you went Bath.
So that was quite a big change as well, because I grew up in Ilford, right? So
And what degree did you?
economics.
Oh, economics. So it's kind of has your degree helped you in a way to what you're doing now, or was it just something you done for the parents?
I think I was actually genuinely really interested in the economic world and global events, and in a way, the actual degree of economics isn't what you think it is in some ways, because it's so mathsy. It's all based on assumptions that aren't real. So based on these 10 assumptions, using this model, you put this number in, and that's what the economy is going to be. The actual interesting bit to me was following because that was just after the financial crash when I went to university, right? So like, trying to understand the different bits, like why is this happening? If that person does this or that company does this, how does that affect that? And that way of thinking has really helped me, because it's the way I approach problems is quite, I guess, economical in that thinking. Okay, you've got these resources. The basic economic problem is you've got scarce resources and you've got unlimited wants. How do you solve that? And that's a lot applied to business, but it's also just general life, right?
Yeah.
We've only got a certain amount of time. How do we then use that in a way to fulfill what's most important to us? So it's that basic economic problem applies to everything. So I think that thinking has really helped me, and just being very clued up to global events, what's going on in the world. But after that, I went into a tech consulting role that I didn't use my skills at all. So it's been this weird path. But I think now, one thing I always say is like it took me 28 or 29 years to become an overnight success. And it's all those random things I did that are unconnected to each other makes me different and gives me a different story and different perspective that enables me to do what I'm doing. So in a way, nothing was really wasted, because even if it's totally unrelated to what I do now, it still gives me different experiences. It gives me different anecdotes. It stops me from being like some people, for example, when they start content straight away, they don't have those different experiences to draw on and make their stories different. They're kind of, everyone uses Steve Jobs or Elon Musk's story instead, whereas I've got my own stories.
Yeah, I love that a lot. And I think one thing which you said, that you were not an overnight success. People talk about how they can create luck, and the way you created your luck was just trying different things. And then I always also sit here and think back, like, how did I reach here? And when I connect all those dots, I'm like, holy crap, imagine the whole thing connected. But that was because I put myself in this position, and that's what led me to be here. And I think that's why your story is great as well. So you left uni and then you went to a tech consulting job. Why tech? Why?
So it's a funny story. So actually, I did a year at the Bank of England while as my degree as well. So I did have that kind of technical economic job as well. And the thing is, my job title was business consultant. So I didn't properly look into the company, I guess, at the beginning. And I didn't realize how much tech would be involved. So it was a complete fluke. And in the interview, hopefully they didn't watch this, they were talking about, like, why are you interested in tech? It's like, oh, tech is a future. It's like, I was just making stuff up on the spot. But that random path then took me into different ways. And it's even by the time I started the job and kind of realized, oh, this is way more techy than I thought it was going to be, it was just a different challenge. So it's like, okay, like I didn't expect to do this, but let's give it a go. I was still looking at other jobs at the same time, but what happens is you get to a certain stage, then you get promoted. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll stick around for a bit more. You keep getting that little bit of extra breadcrumb to keep you there. And while I knew that I didn't want to do it long term, in a way, I didn't know what I wanted to do long term. So I just stayed, and you keep putting it down the road. What am I going to do? What am I going to do when I grow up? I was like, I am already grown up, but you just don't know. And I think a lot of people are sometimes in that position of they don't necessarily enjoy their job, or they don't want to do their job forever. But because they don't know what they want to do, they just keep cruising along.
How did you figure out what you wanted to do? Because I know some of my friends want to do something, but they're like, what should I do? How do I get started? Where do I get started from?
I think this comes back to what you said about the experimentation, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to become a writer when I was 6 years old, but that dream had long gone. So when I started writing online, it was just New Year's resolution, January 2020. Oh, like a new product, new year, new me. And people are probably at that stage now, right? Of, oh, it would be cool if I do that. And for me, it's more about processing my own thoughts, because I used to read so much and I disagreed with a lot of what I read. And I think that was, I guess, the key trait of what made my writing interesting, is I wasn't just giving the same advice to everybody else. And starting the writing was just that idea of, let me do something. I didn't think it'd ever become a career. I didn't think anybody would even read it. And I think that's what sometimes people need to do, is instead of thinking, what is the one thing that's going to fix my life? Just try stuff. Like, just do it, low risk experiments. For example, I started writing in my own name because I thought nobody was going to care. if in hindsight, it worked out, but it got me in trouble a bit, right? Because I then suddenly had a personal brand online that conflicted with other things. And it's weird because then people adding your personal Facebook. And until I became full-time on it, it was weird to have those worlds collide of my personal life and the business persona, or not even the persona, just the writing side, and all these random Americans adding me. And if I could go back, I wouldn't change it. But there was a period I was like, I wish I used a pseudonym. And that's what you can do. If you want to just start out as a creator or something like that, you don't even need to use your own face, right?
Yeah.
You could start off under a name that nobody even knows it's you. Just test out, just have fun. And I think that's the bit that's missing from so many people. They're trying to figure out the perfect solution rather than just, oh, let me try this, it could be fun. Let's say even with hobbies, right? You don't need to start something in the belief that, let's say you start salsa. You don't feel like, okay, I'm going to start salsa, I'm going to become world champion. Just do it for fun. If you enjoy it, do it more. If you enjoy it more, do it more. If you want to then go do competitions, then do that. But people don't start things unless they think they're going to be really good at it. And that defeats the purpose. You don't know what you're going to be good at until you start doing it.
I think I love that so much. And what most people I feel like have a problem with is that they know all these things they should be doing, trying out, but their main excuse is going to be, I don't have time. So did you try all this stuff which like your writing and content creation and everything while you were at your job? If so, how did you manage your time?
I think I've always had this side obsession. So I did karate, like I was in the national squad when I was younger. That was 20, 25 hours of training a week. I did bhangra dancing. Okay. When I did a competition for that, that was 20, 25 hours a week. And I always had something on the side. It's just my personality in some ways, where beyond the day job, I always had some other passion. And I think that's the place to start for many people. It's just find something you love. And if you love doing it, you're going to make time for it. And the hard thing is that you said at the beginning, how do you make time for it? And it's also looking at where are you spending your time right now?
Yes.
Because if you are seriously working 80-hour weeks, 100-hour weeks, then yes, it is very difficult. And then it's looking at how do I start something very, very small? And maybe that's even, for example, TikTok, right? If you want to do TikTok, minute videos, obviously it's going to spend a lot more time behind the creation strategy once you get bigger. But at the beginning, you can make 60-second TikToks. Nobody can not make a 60-second TikTok.
I used to make 5 TikToks in a day by just putting my phone up.
Exactly, right? And in a way, the world has changed from when I first started content and shifted more towards short form, which makes it easy. Let's say you want to start writing. Start on Twitter. Start on LinkedIn. I have a weird problem with LinkedIn in some ways because LinkedIn is where the most people who know me in real life follow me.
Okay.
I always have that personal barrier of I post there less because it's people who know me in real life. And I don't know why. That's still strange. And I want to overcome it and I'm going to do it. But it's still, I know I kind of push that off because I'm like, but like these people know from school are going to see it. And just, it's weird. But if you're thinking about, okay, I don't have time for something, think what's the smallest possible thing you can do? So let's say you want to start, I used the example of salsa before, right? Why don't you just watch a 5-minute YouTube video and do that once a day? You can learn the basics yourself. And then, okay, once you get a bit more confidence, maybe you then go to a class. But it is really determining because some people, it's also varying privileges, right? Some people don't have the time because they're carers or because they've got kids. And that's where it's also your relationships come into play of, is there anybody out there who can help you and maybe cover you for an hour or two?
I think with that point, I feel like everyone can take out at least 60 minutes of their day to do something they love, no matter what situation they're in, unless they work 100 hours a week or 80 hours a week. But I think most people just are lazy. That's what I feel like. So that's why I'm trying to kind of ask you questions which can kind of make me prove myself wrong that no, maybe I'm wrong. But I think every time I look at people and they know what to do, but they won't do it because they're just lazy. And that's the problem, I feel like.
I think sometimes it's more fear than laziness. Of fear of failure as well, right? Yeah. Because part of what we do, right, we fail all the time, right? People don't actually see the failures. And it's what I always tell people as well. If you're worried about starting something and you're worried about it failing, remember that nobody sees the failures because if by definition you got big enough for enough people to see that, you've succeeded. So let's say you start content online and people don't think you're a good writer. Enough people have read you to even consider that. Or people have seen your TikToks. People have seen those TikToks. That means you're doing well. if you were doing terrible, nobody would even see it. Like, you can't lose. Like, if you try and it doesn't work out, nobody's even seen it. And this whole idea of, it comes back to the spotlight effect, right? Of everybody thinks that people are paying much more attention to than they actually are. Like, I've got like friends who I've known for 20 years who don't really know what I do. And it's just because they've got their own stuff, they've got their own lives, their own interests, and that's absolutely fine. But we have it in our heads, everybody's watching us, and if we make a mistake, then they're going to make fun of us. And that is like, some people out there are like that, right? Some people they do get the trolls.
Yeah.
But most people are just busy with their own stuff. They don't care enough to see if you're slipping up, to like gossip about you, to talk about you behind your back, because like everybody's got their own problems. And I guess that's what I tell people as well, is failure is just something we've got to get more used to, because there's a difference between like you investing all of your life savings into a business and that failing. That's bad, right? Because then you don't have your money. But making a few mistakes, or like investing a bit of time into a course or something like that to try and improve your skills, it's a very small failure.
Yep. And
maybe what you can think of is, what's the smallest failure that you can accept, or the biggest failure even that you can accept, and have a go at it. Because if you look at investing, right, you could say, I've got fun money in crypto. Now, I don't necessarily I don't know what's going to happen with it. But if I lose all of that money, it's okay.
Yeah.
And you've got to think about it with yourself, with your time. What's the most amount of time you're willing to put into something, and if not to work out? And if you can say, I can put in 10 minutes a day or an hour a day, whatever it is, and it doesn't work out, and that's fine, because at least I tried.
Yeah. I think the part of failure I always keep relating to is the part of like, you're here, success is here, and failure is the middle bridge, and you have to pass this road of failure to reach success. And I think it also relates back to what you were saying, was trying different stuff. And I think the whole part of trying different stuff is that, yes, you might fail at a few stuff, but you just need one thing to work out. And that's the part which people will know you for, because most people know Elon Musk for Tesla and all the things, but no one knows him for what he failed at. So I think that's a really nice way you have put there. Going back to your tech job, and while you were working there, how did you thought of becoming a writer on Medium? Or did you write something prior to that? Or was it just like, oh, let me give this a try? How did that come up?
So it's weird in some ways, because I actually forgot the writing I did before, because they used to say different things, because I never did it under my own name. So one thing, I guess I didn't consider it writing. It was just me messing about. So did you ever play like wrestling games when you were a kid, like on PS2 and stuff, right? So there's a game called SmackDown, Here Comes the Pain. So when I was, 13, I was obsessed with that game, and there's message boards on IGN. I don't know if you've heard of that, right?
I have
So
not.
it was a website which basically had message boards about gaming. And on there was like people giving ideas about the games, or how you can make the games better in the future. And for some reason, I just got obsessed with it. And on this message board, then they have this like a ranking system, right? Of the number of posts you've done relative to how many likes you've got, whatever it is. And on this list of a few hundred people, I was 4th.
Oh, wow.
And that was I was so proud of that at the time. It was such a weird thing, like, looking back at it, right? I was 13, it's over half my life ago. And in some ways, it's the whole thing of like, I was clearly a good writer back then. But I didn't really know about it. And then obviously got busy with exam stuff, stopped doing it. And it was obviously, for me, that was a bit weird, because this was everybody being used to gaming and Discord and sort of stuff. Writing on some random message board and just being a bit freaked out by people knowing who I am, whatever. And then later on, I wrote again when it was, because I was doing a techie job, but I still had this interest in business and things like that. I started a little business blog. I only wrote 5 blogs for it, and nobody ever read it. And it was basically a massive distraction in some ways. And that shut down. So that's where the name of my original company is The Strategy Arena. Okay. And that was that original blog. It was called The Strategy Arena. And I made a little logo for it. It was this whole thing when people procrastinate actually doing the work. Yeah. I spent so much time coming with the idea and the concept. And then when I actually came to doing the work, I got a bit bored, and I was like, okay, I'll give it up. But I did a couple versions of writing and blogging in a way. But with Medium, it was actually because of my tech job. Okay. So Medium has got a ton of content about technical stuff, about coding and things like that. So as part of my job, obviously, anybody who does any tech stuff, they realize you don't know anything, right? You just Google things. And your skill is basically how good are you at understanding what you Google. So that's what you used to do, right? You used to Google, okay, I want to do this thing. How do I do it? And then you get the code snippets, you get the ideas. And it kept hitting Medium from that. in the search results. But you can only read 3 articles a month for free. So then, okay, I was thinking, should I get a membership or not? You can obviously get around it by using Google Incognito, but I didn't say that. And I got a membership. Once you get a membership, it's only $5 a month, right? So it's barely anything. Then you start getting daily digests. They start emailing you every day with the top stories about different things. And originally, I was actually reading a lot about politics on there because the American politics, and it was the Trump time, Biden, all that. Well, it wasn't even Trump, it was Trump and Obama, right? Way back, right? So I was reading a lot of that stuff, and I started reading a lot of self-help stuff. And I was just reading a lot of things. What I was doing is commenting. And this is one thing I'd say to a lot of people as well. If you want to get into writing, for example, and you feel like writing a blog is a big deal, start by commenting. So if you go to somewhere like Medium, you read an article, then you comment with your ideas, and you're just building that habit, right? Of, okay, here's an idea. Oh, this is something my personal experience related to that. And some people like it. I think I gained 100 followers just from me commenting on other people's posts without even doing my own post yet. And then you start seeing things about how you can make money on Medium and all that sort of stuff. So I was like, okay, I thought in my head, I set my expectations very low. Oh, if I can make $100 a month, that would be pretty cool. And it was more about the idea of like me commenting on people's ideas, like, oh, this is rubbish. Like, I want to. So it's very easy to take down somebody else's idea. What I want to prove to myself, I have my own ideas that are useful to people and that can help people. And even then, that first article was tough, right? So I spent 2 or 3 weeks writing that first article, and it was only about 1,200 words, something like that. Now that's something I'd do in like an hour or 2 hours, right? I could just bang it out because I've got way more experience. But it went viral straight away. So in the first couple of weeks, it got 100,000 views.
Oh, wow.
And that article alone earned me $2,000. So when I had that, like, not everybody gets that first validation instant, right? So I've written one article that straight away went into the top, I don't know, like 100 articles of the month, whatever it was. And I was I was trending on the website. You're like, oh, okay, I'm kind of good at this. And people will be commenting on it, like, where did you find your writing voice? I just wrote it. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But that triggered everything. And then, even then, like, it took me a long time to actually consider as a career or something I could do full time. It was like, oh, wow, this is crazy. Like, I'm going viral on the internet. And in many ways, I think I was successful because I didn't go with the attitude of this has to be this, this, and this.
Yeah.
I just went like, oh, this is fun. Like, wow, like people are liking it. It was just, I had that sense of wonder. And I think that wonder really like pushed me forwards.
I think that's really, I love the story of how you actually started with commenting and that led you to actually writing a blog. And I think most people want to start big, but they don't do the small steps. And that's why it's like looking at Elon Musk rather than looking at someone who's just made £1 million and looking at that person as the inspiration. When you started that first blog and you wrote it out and you made the $2,000, was that when it sparked in your, like, an idea sparked in your mind that I could do this full time? And what was your mind like that, or back then when you hit that $2,000 mark?
I think I still never thought that it was gonna ever. It was a whole identity thing, right? Of I was the kid that got good grades, went to good university, got a professional job. Going and quitting my job and become a writer seemed absolutely insane. Like, it didn't even cross my mind. I didn't think it crossed my mind for a long time. I just thought, like, oh, this is nice side money, right? And that's why I just thought, oh, it could be good side money for the future. It took me a very, very long time to even consider this is something I could take as a full-time gig. And because after that was a big fallow period, right? Because that was January 2020. Then the pandemic and the lockdowns happened in March, a couple months later. So a lot of people ask me, is it because I started in the pandemic? I actually started before. And then it spilled over, but the pandemic gave me way more time to work on it. Because now I didn't have a social life. I didn't have anything else going on. And what happened, I think it was another 4 or 5 months until I had another big hit again.
Okay.
So maybe I was only writing like an article and a half a week, I think I worked it out as. So maybe in 4 months I had, let's do the maths quickly, about 25 articles, right? So 25 other articles, maybe 2 or 3 of them got over $100. Most of them were in the kind of $20 to $50 range, right? So it's like, oh, okay, I just got lucky. And that's kind of what I was saying myself. I'm a one-hit wonder, basically. And then I started getting, but what happened is I started getting involved in the community again. And it's like, it's a strange thing of where I've always done that in some ways, but I've never really publicized it. I've never publicized it at a time. I wouldn't tell people, oh yeah, I'm part of this writing Facebook group, because it seems like such a nerdy, dweeby thing to do, right? Yeah. And I always had this separation in some ways of this maybe nerdy or like different interests, I wouldn't necessarily tell people my day-to-day life about that. And even then, like my other accounts, nobody knew about me writing until 9 months later when I was over 1 million views. That's when I started telling people, publishing it. But that fallow period is where I actually started learning the craft a bit more. So in some regards, that first viral article was lucky. Like, it was good, but I didn't know why it was good. It was just my style, the way I talk, the way I explain things. But that fallow period really taught me a lot. And then I started had a purple patch, right? Where I was having basically every other article was a big hit. But actually quitting my job, taking that full time, that was only once I was out earning my day job for like several months in a row. And even then, that was stressful.
I think just taking that jump of leaving your job, it must be the amount of scenarios which plays in your mind. How did you overcome that step? Because most people, I think most people are scared to leave their job because they do not believe in themselves, that something may go wrong or something along those lines. So what was your thought process like back then?
So I tore myself apart over this, right? So I would like to pretend I was all cool and, oh yeah, I knew what I was doing. I was so confident. I was not. It was so much stress and so much sleepless nights and me doubting myself. And it took me months from the idea, maybe it was in November 2020, okay, maybe I could do this full time. In February 2021, I took a week off. I said, this is the week that I'm going to make the decision. And it was making lists and pros and cons. And I even made a PowerPoint presentation, right? And what I did is presented it to my family. Like, okay, this is why I'm going to do it. This is what I think it's going to go. And it wasn't for them because they were like, my dad was always somebody who was just like, you enjoy that more, quit your job and do it, right?
I wanted to ask that as well, because coming from an Asian family, so like your parents, so you could carry on actually, because I really want to know how it was for you.
And I'm so lucky in that my dad and like my parents have always been, if you're happy doing something, go and do that. They've never been a part of that prestige or whatever like that. And my dad was always like, just quit, you'll work it out.
Oh, wow.
Like, he's like, I believe in you, like, you'll be fine, right? And I was like, but what about this? But what about security? Is almost the roles reversed, right? I was like, but what about security? What about this? What about like, and he's like, oh no, you'll be fine. Like, just, it didn't bother him at all. And it was such a massive vote of confidence that I don't know if he wasn't like that, if he made it difficult, or if he was like, oh, you're an idiot, like, what do you think you're doing? I don't know if I would ever quit my job. And that's why in some of the stuff I'm doing now, I know that I'm very lucky that I had parents who believed in me in that way, because it's not about the financial backing, which some people think. It's more about that belief in me. And a lot of people don't necessarily have that. So I'm lucky to have that. And I know a lot of people don't. So how do I provide that kind of environment for other people who are struggling, where their parents don't believe in them, their family doesn't believe in them, or people around them don't believe in them? I was just so lucky. And it was almost that they convinced me to quit my job rather than me convincing them to like support me quit my job. So I did that PowerPoint and they're like, yeah, quit your job, like, it's fine. And it was so not a big deal for them that it was just really bizarre for me, because like you said, you're so used to seeing in the media and people talking about how Asian parents this and Asian parents are that. And I didn't have that experience at all. And it's interesting because my dad had that professional background. He was an accountant. It's not like he was like some weird creative or anything like that, which sometimes you think if you've got creative parents, they're more likely to encourage you to do creative fields. My dad was very much worked his way up an accounting firm for 30 years, became the senior partner, owned the accounting firm. He did the very, very corporate role. But then he was so open to be like, yeah, just do what makes you happy. You're happy. I can see you're happy and this makes you happier. So I want you to do that. And like, it's, you just can't, it's very difficult to quantify that, but how much of a difference that made to me.
Yeah. I think me, when I was working at the job as well, and I was doing content creation and I wanted to do it full time, but my dad would look at me in my eyes and be like, what in the hell are you doing? Like, making these videos. So I'm there sitting, making those girl, I'm wearing a wig and I'm doing that conversation style video. And he would, I still remember one time he was like, you're going to go crazy or you're going mental. And I just said to him that, keep watching. And I didn't say anything else. One thing I done well was I kept my job while I was doing this. And I think that's what you done as well. You kept your job while you were building your side hustle. And that's why when I left my job, my side hustle was making me enough money that my dad was confident that, okay, you can take it full time. And I think I did leave my job first and go full time, and it didn't work out. So I had to go back and get a job, and then I done this the right way, like you done it. And I think having a supportive family is a big thing. But I think with I want to get to Bay HQ after. I think that's one of your way to kind of inspire the Asian community. So we're going to come back to that later as well. But going back to Medium writing, there was I think I saw one of your story that you were the second fastest person on Medium to get 50,000 followers after Barack Obama. Was that after your first article or like after your few articles?
So the weird thing about Medium is that it's huge in San Francisco and New York, right? Here it's not so well known, but it's also the scale, right? Because the most followed person on Medium has maybe 300,000 followers.
Okay.
So it's a lot smaller than say TikTok or YouTube or Instagram. And it's partly due to the content, right? Because it's long form versus short form.
Yeah.
It's way easier to get lots of tweets and people to spend time reading your tweets because it's not very long. But on the writing side, because articles are generally like 4-minute reads, 5-minute reads, up to 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever, you need more effort. And the difference is Medium is also a paid platform. So the value of 100,000 followers on Medium versus 100,000 followers on YouTube or something like that is massively different, because each of those people is somebody who's shown that they're paying for the content.
How do you get paid on Medium though?
So on Medium, how it works is, if like I pay $5 per month to be a reader, if I spend half my time reading your content, half of my membership after Medium's cut goes to you.
Okay.
So when you think about that, it's $5 per month per person. But once you've had millions of views, that stacks up over time. And there's millions of views. If your average read time is say 5 minutes per article, then that's how it adds up.
Makes sense.
And
no, don't worry. I think the question was about how much. No, prior to like on Medium.
Oh, the fastest growing.
Barack Obama. Yes.
Oh, so what happened there is on the pandemic. So January 2020, right? I had 100 followers.
Yeah.
By mid next year, I had 50,000.
Oh wow.
So that puts me. Like, I haven't checked recently because I've been writing a lot less recently. But I was in the top 100 out of 400,000 or something like that writers on the platform. So I've got more followers than Joe Biden, than the World Health Organization, which is kind of disturbing. I think people should be following the World Health Organization rather than me. But Barack Obama was obviously a different league. But what happened is I was able to grow my following very quickly, despite not publishing anywhere near as much as many other people. So a lot of people might have more followers than me now, but they publish 20 or 30 times the amount of articles. So my hit rate was really high, and that's what my difference maker was, is that I might only write once a week or twice a week, but those articles really hit, and that's what I was seeing. And yeah, like, so I think last time I checked, it's like 67,000 followers, but I've only written one article in the last 10 months. And that's just because other stuff now is more interesting to me. So with the Medium, what the problem is that once you start, I think with any type of content, once you start putting a lot out there, then you don't want to put more out there unless you're actually really interested in it. And it's also the difference between long form and short form, right? If I'm going to write an article, I'm going to put some proper attention, proper thinking into it. Then unless I'm really interested in that topic, I really think it's going to make a difference, I'm not going to make it.
Someone starting off on Medium right now, what would you suggest to them? Or are things they should take into consideration, or like to be successful and start making money on Medium?
So one of the tough things about Medium is, so like at my peak, I was earning 10K a month on Medium, right? And that puts me in the top 0.01%. So there's maybe a couple hundred people who are earning 4 figures a month out of thousands and thousands and thousands of writers. So it's the whole thing at the beginning. What you need to think about is, like, if you're trying to go into some money-making scheme, it's really not a good idea. But the difference is, and this is where you become smarter, more strategic, if you're using it as a lead magnet for a paid product, that's where you can make your money. Because think about what you're doing is you're getting free, you're being publicity, right? So let's say you want to write an article about Amazon FBA. Let's say people read the article like you've written. Medium is distributing it. Medium is putting it in their emails to their millions of readers. Let's say you get 10,000 views, right? Not massive, but those 10,000 views are way more intentional than your average 10,000 views on TikTok. Because one, these people are paying members, so they're more likely they've got a higher spending capacity, they're more likely to buy.
You might have given me a kind of what I need to do, because I'm thinking of corporate people reading Medium and they might be interested in that.
It's the audience, right? The audience on
Yeah.
Medium on average is 100K salary. So if you've got 100K, are you going to buy something for $1,000 that's a course? Way more likely than your average person scrolling on TikTok or Instagram. And that's a smart thing to do. If you're a business, don't care about how much money you can make from like the Medium partner program in terms of subscriptions. Think about how many people can you add to your email list? How many people can you get to buy your freebie, to get your freebie? And if you get those people in and then they then buy a product from you, and that product is worth $1,000 or like more than that, especially if you're B2B, right? If you're B2B and you're selling services that are thousands of dollars a pop, if you get one client a month from writing 4 articles in Medium, that's a massive return on investment.
Does businesses are businesses on Medium reading? Many businesses, you would say?
So one aspect of what I did on Medium is I was the editor of Entrepreneur's Handbook. So a big part of the audience of Medium is tech people, the business audience, like startups, entrepreneurs.
That's good.
There's also a really big growing true crime part as well, but you can kind of see like what the big audiences are on Medium. So business is one of the biggest niches on Medium, because that's like a lot of entrepreneurs are looking for advice, right? And lots of people in tech are looking for how can I build a company. So a lot of who I published was B2B companies. And what they're doing is, okay, so let's say you're talking about Amazon FBA. Let's say you write a headline saying how to make X amount per month from Amazon FBA. Let's say a lot of people click on that. Then what you're doing is giving away free value in the actual article. And that's the main thing. You can't just make it a sales pitch. And that's one of the mistakes a lot of people make. They do it as marketing content, do it as value content, like give it like what you do in your videos.
It's
right?
like on YouTube videos.
Yeah.
You can't sell.
So if you do that, then you get people on your email list. You can then sell to them later on. So that's what I'd advise people. If they want to use Medium as a money-making tool, they need to have an actual business really. And that's how they can, and use it as a top of funnel thing. If they just want to write for enjoyment, that's a totally different thing. And what I say, I've told, because I've like had calls in Medium and I've done different conferences and stuff there. There's 3 types of people in Medium, right? One are the people who just love writing and they're just doing it for fun. And like they're the best people, right? Because they're just doing it and like they love what they're doing. They don't really care if they make money. They don't care if they get email signups. It's just a hobby for them.
Yeah.
Then you've got the strategic people who are doing it because that's a funnel, that's going to be part of their marketing efforts, it's going to get them clients. And they're good as well because they're doing it from, they can't get anything unless they're actually offering value to the readers. And that's what it all comes down to. If you can't be successful in any of these platforms if you're in it for yourself, you've got to give that content and people like you because you're helping them. And the third type of people are just ones trying to make money from Medium directly. And they think Medium is an easy place to make money. And it's just not. It's like the same with YouTube, right?
Yeah.
If you just want to make money, YouTube is a terrible idea, right? Yeah. Because it's a huge amount of time if you can do it. It's way better for a lot of people. If you just want to make quick money, become an Uber driver, become a delivery driver. That's going to get you more money right now. And the only reason you should create a channel or try to build a Medium following is if you've got a longer term vision or you just really enjoy what you're doing. Yeah. So it's got to be one of those two, right? And ideally, you should be enjoying what you're doing anyway.
Yeah.
But if you're just going into one of these platforms and thinking, I'm going to do it as this is my way to get rich, it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. Like, it's not that easy. And a lot of people sell Medium course about how to make money and blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, it just like, it doesn't work like that. And these people have thousands of people. And I see it seems so scammy to me. Yeah.
What's funny, they do sell those courses.
They do sell. And I look at it like, oh, you people, like, and just, the problem is that I have this, I guess it's I have some base of integrity and morality, right? It's like I don't want to scam people, but I can just see if I, for example, was to make a course about how to make money on Medium, sell it for $1,000 or whatever it is, and really pump all my like branding around that area, most of the people would not make back their $1,000, and I'd be just playing it like how you. A big thing in people doing marketing, right, is that you play on people's insecurities. Yeah. And like, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that person who plays on people's insecurities to make money that they're probably not going to get a good return on investment from. Yeah. Like, yes, I could make lots of money that way, but like, I don't want to live like that.
You could do in the sense of like, because you have so much expertise, and I'm telling you, you can probably make a better course which teaches people not how to make money on Medium, but teaches people how to write on Medium. Yeah. And that could be kind of your thing, which now, because you have a following on Medium of like 68,000 people, you could just make content on that as well, because I think people would be interested in that.
And my current course is about how to write for founders, right? Because and it's looking in the area, and what I do is advise like startups and founders on how to write effectively, because a lot of people are going from this old school train of thought of like, it's very cold and very boring. And
Yeah.
I was reading a book earlier today.
Very professional.
Yeah. I was reading a book earlier today, right? And I won't name it because I might actually talk to someone in the future. But I was so bored. It was terrible, right? And all the sentences were about 5 lines long. So I'm just like, this book has got massively good reviews, right? It's won awards. It's got hundreds of thousands of reviews. And people recommend it. It's like, oh, this is the book you need to read if you're starting up a company. And I realized this is terrible writing. And that's the thing, is that what I look at in this world is, and it's even with people out there, is that the actual standards on average are very low. 90% of writers are terrible. 90% of YouTubers are terrible. 90% of TikTokers are terrible. So people look at it, market is saturated. If you're good, the market isn't as saturated as you think it is. And that's the key thing that people
I love
think
that
about.
one so much, yeah.
Like, there's a huge amount of competition at the lower levels, right? There's a huge amount of competition for like mediocre content.
Yeah.
There's not that much competition for exceptional content.
Yeah.
So if you're focusing on how can I really create something good, you're going to get there. If you're focusing on how can I make money quickly as possible, you're not.
I love that so much. And I feel like that relates with every single niche, because people come to me and be like, sometimes like, oh, Amazon's saturated. But I'm like, no, it's not. Firstly, new products are coming in every single week. Secondly, if you learn to do Amazon different to what most people are doing, there is no competition for yourself. So I feel like that one there puts it really nicely there. I think another thing you do, which you spoke about, was ghostwriting. What is that? Just writing articles for companies, which you mentioned just a while ago?
Yeah, because so if you look at the average founder, right? And this is where I might blow some people's minds. That most of what you read on the internet isn't actually written by the person you think it's been written by, right? You think like these founders who've got hundreds of millions and they're managing thousands of employees are sitting there writing their own articles. Some of them are, yes, but it's very rare. Most of it, hire somebody like me to do it for them. And that's where the reputation I have of my own following, of being an editor, of knowing what I'm talking about comes into play. And what they'll basically do is, I tend to go for longer term relationships because it's just too much churn. Otherwise, as you probably know, when you got different clients, you don't want the sales cycle because that just takes so much time and effort. I'd rather have a contract with an agency who then have all the startups as their clients and I work with them, rather than me having to manage 20 different relationships. But what they'll get me to do essentially is the founder will have an idea, who have done a talk or he will do something like that. And then I'll repurpose that and then write it about this content. And sometimes they just send me a voice note. It'll be like a 2-minute voice note. Oh, I was thinking about the other day how this problem exists in startups and everybody's doing it this way, but I think I should do it that way. And then I write an article about that.
How can you write from a 2-minute talk to a 1,000-word article?
And this is where my background comes into play, right? Because then I can obviously I can beef up with my own information. I know a lot of it is about understanding the founder's mentality. Because if you understand their philosophy, you can fill it out with other bits you know about them, right? So if I've written 20 articles for them already, if they give me a 2-minute voice note about a new idea, I know all the other stuff from the previous articles, and that's where it compounds over time, where the deeper relationship I have with them, the more valuable I am to them. And that side of things only started once I'd already quit my job.
Okay.
And it's something which I'm actually examining at the moment. And even like last night, I was thinking about this, do I keep doing this or not? Because for me, it's a great way to make money. Yeah. But it takes me away from my own brand and the other things I'm doing. So it's that balance of, in some ways, it's me hedging. When I'm doing stuff for founders behind the scenes, and people don't even know that I'm doing that, I can't name my clients. So I've got articles there in Forbes, Entrepreneur, like every single Wall Street Journal, everywhere, right? Not under my name. I was like, okay, I need to think about this in terms of what's my long-term goal here. Do I sacrifice some of this money in the short term to then build up my own brand, and then so that I'm writing in Wall Street Journal as myself, which is a real goal? But it's hard to say no to money. And this is the challenge. And it's a challenge that you still face, of where it's that investing in myself side of things, right? It's like I need to take a bit of a hit sometimes because then I can build up my own brand. And we talked about it earlier about if I'm spreading myself so thin, then I'm actually doing everything to a lower quality, and it starts affecting that. So the ghostwriting is a great way to, especially for somebody when I just came out of my job, to be like, okay, I'm making good money now, I'm secure, but it's also what's the long-term plan? The long-term plan being a ghostwriter, it depends on your personality. I can't do it. I'd get bored, stiff. Like, so you want to do your own ideas.
So ghostwriting is mainly a kind of thing you chose, not because you lost passion from medium writing, but because mainly it's the money which it will provide you to do other stuff well.
So if you think about it like this, where let's say you're really good at creating content, but you don't have a huge background, you don't have a product, you don't have something like that. So we look at Medium, right? If I write an article on Medium and I'm selling my own products, maybe I can make X amount from that, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm a multi-billion-dollar company and I write on Medium as the founder of the multi-billion-dollar company, or I write on Forbes as the founder of the multi-million-dollar company, what's the ROI on that? The ROI for that person in the multi-billion-dollar company is way higher than I get for myself. So therefore, I can charge them my time way higher. So if like you look at Medium, for example, right, because it's based on a performance of an article, the average I can get from writing for other people per article is way higher.
How much would it range?
So $1 per word, right?
$1 per word?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. So
So-
if it's like 1,000 word, makes
Yeah.
sense.
And then obviously sometimes I'm writing 2,000, and like I've done book proposals, for example, similar kind of thing. And if you think about now how fast I'm at writing and the experience I built up, it's quite a good way to earn money. But the problem for me is that it distracts me too much from my own brand. And that's the challenge of, okay, if I just wanted to make money, I could just ghostwrite. But I want the satisfaction, I want the happiness as well. And that's the, I guess, entrepreneur's dilemma in some ways
Yeah.
of what makes you money versus what makes you happy.
You have to balance both, I
Yeah.
think.
And it's also, as ghostwriting doesn't scale, okay?
Yeah.
It's selling my
It's
time.
on you as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
So I could earn several 100,000 a year from just purely ghostwriting. And maybe I get to the leagues where I can do this kind of Mark Manson, Will Smith kind of thing. But even then, Mark Manson and Will Smith. So people listening don't know. So Will Smith's autobiography was co-written with Mark Manson, who's
Okay.
a big author and like blogger online. But that was only after he released his own book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I don't know if you censor this or not. You can beep that out if you want.
Stays on
Yeah.
raw.
So because he had such a massive personal brand, his ghostwriting rates, I don't know how much he charged that Will Smith book.
Probably
You
a
can
lot.
imagine it's astronomical, right?
Yeah. He probably took a cut from the book itself.
Yeah. And this is the thing of where my own personal brand could scale to millions, to tens of millions. My ghostwriting side couldn't do that. It can get me, it's a safety again, right? Ghostwriting is safe for me. It'd almost be like me having a job again. If I just purely did ghostwriting, I'm just working with other people. It's like I've got a job. I lose my own creativity. I lose my own thinking. I lose my own strategic decision making. So for me, it's that challenge of like, what do I want to do? Because yes, it's entrepreneurial in terms of having clients and managing those. But the real thing is my own brand. And that's where it's like my personal brand and the Bay HQ at the moment. And there's other things I do as well, but that's more complicated. So Entrepreneur's Handbook, for example, I don't own that, but it's a brand which I'm the face of it. So those things will scale, but in the short term, they won't be earning as much. But if I'm not wasting my time, if I'm spending my time doing the ghostwriting, which earns me money now, but it's taking away from the money I could be earning in the future because I'm not spending it on my own brand. And that's the little dilemma I have there.
So I think what I can see from there is a situation I was in a while ago as well, is that stuff is making me money and I need to have that. But then I'm like, I don't enjoy it that much. I enjoy this part now. But I'm like, if I stop doing that, then who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to pay the staff and everything like that? So
it's even with coaching, right? Coaching is a similar thing.
yeah.
And it depends on what you're coaching. But coaching is selling your time for money.
Yes.
Which is a great income source. But it's also about what your ambitions are and what you enjoy and where you want to go. Because if you've got, say, 10 coaching clients and that takes up 10, 15 hours a week, it might be great income.
Yeah.
But it's 10 or 15 hours a week, which you have less energy for your own brand and your own storytelling. And it's just trying to work out that balance. And I always say it's like, that isn't an easy answer. There's no, everybody's got to think about it for themselves about what they want that balance to be. But it's part of what makes it fun, right? Because if it was just an easy answer that I could just tell you, okay, you should spend 10% of your time on this, 20% of your time on that, that's boring. You've got to work it out for yourself. What matters to you? What's important to you? Where do you want to spend your time? And it can be in seasons, right? It could be like right at the beginning, you want to be selling your time because you need to make the money to get yourself some safety blanket. But later on, it's just making sure that you don't get trapped in that safety blanket where you I quit my job to do my own brand and to do my own ideas and some ideas out there. But then do I just actually go behind the scenes and I'm just working for people on ghostwriting? And it's like, have I just sacrificed my own dream?
I think that's
like a Trojan horse.
And that's when, it's like that thing about comfort. It's like, it's comfortable. That's why you want to do it. When you have no backup plans, that's when you have nothing to rely back on. And that's when you can kind of just have to make this successful. Otherwise, nothing's going to work out. So talking about Bay HQ, what inspired you to start Bay HQ after being a blogger? Because the reason why most people start blogging is because they don't want to show their face or they just don't want to speak. But podcasting, you don't do audio, you also do visual as well. So what inspired you to do that?
So the first podcast was the Mindful and Driven one now, which is it's gone.
I saw something around that on your website, but I didn't know if that was still continued or not.
Yeah, it is. My website needs a big update. That's a big task I have on my list, and it's one of those things of where, because it's a strategic thing to do, I need to really properly map it out, and then you just keep procrastinating it. But Mindful and Driven, the first podcast, I originally started a month after I quit my job, and the idea behind it was because writing, when it was my side hustle, was fun. There was no pressure. I had my main job income. Once it became my main job, it's different. The relationship changes, right? It's the best way to ruin your hobby or your passion is to start making money from it in some ways, because now you have to think about it differently.
Yes.
So what I did is I decided, okay, I'm going to start a podcast because it's going to be a new challenge. I don't know how to podcast. I'm probably going to be crap at it, but it's that whole like obsessive nature of myself, right? Like, okay, I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to learn how to do it. I'm going to work it all out. Whereas not that I worked out writing, but I got to that 9 out of 10 on it, or like 8 out of 10, whatever you want to call it. And then that podcast was just supposed to be like a fun thing. It wasn't going to make any money. And the initial concept was around people who are ambitious. How do they stop themselves from burning out? And that was the premise of the first podcast. Then
that's fine.
Like the Entrepreneur's Handbook, the publication I work for with Medium, what he basically did is said, can I buy you out? Can I buy out your podcast? And then you do it for me instead. And I didn't want to do that time because like, okay, if he buys out, then I'm then working more for him. So I wanted to, okay, I'll do a separate podcast for you. And that's the Entrepreneur's Handbook podcast, which was born. And that one's still going today. And that's the one which is a different power level on that one, right? Mindful and Driven was using my own.
So just on the Entrepreneur's Handbook, so someone saw your Medium article and that's where they found you.
So I was writing for Entrepreneur's Handbook is a publication on Medium.
Oh, it's a publication on Medium. And you said when we first spoke that the only people allowed to come on it is like people with high net worth, like 50 million or 100 million, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy. But so, I want to know more about that as well a bit.
So Entrepreneur's Handbook is an editorship role that I took on in June 2020. And like on Medium, there's different publications, right? So people can submit their articles to Entrepreneur's Handbook. I then decide, is this good or bad? They need to improve this. And it's how I made a lot of connections, right? Because if entrepreneurs want to be friends with you because they want to be published with you, you're then having all these conversations with pretty cool people. And I was doing that like throughout from June 2020. So that was one of my different income sources, right? As being an editor. And then the guy who ran that, I said, okay, I can see you're doing your own podcast. Can we take that as an Entrepreneur's Handbook podcast and bring it into my brand? So then I started the Entrepreneur's Handbook podcast for them. So it's one of the other branches of things I do, I guess. And with that one, because of the brand, so the guy who founded Entrepreneur's Handbook, Dave Schools, he's the co-founder, he's the founding team of Hopin. And Hopin went from 0 to 8 billion in 2 years. So this guy's concept of what rich is and what successful is very different to my own. And that's like insane. So the company was founded in November 2019. And then 2 years later, $8 billion valuation, invested in by the biggest venture capital funds in the world, is massive, right? So that's why he didn't have enough time to run Entrepreneur's Handbook, and that's where I came into play. And once I started with that podcast, we could initially get very big guests very easily because one, we have like a 40,000 email list, we've got a few 100,000 followers, we've got that because we're an official partner of Medium about startups. So it was quite easy to get those initial guests. And then what happens is that, so I had, in the first 10 guests, there was like a couple of people who started like unicorns, right? So that's $1 billion companies. And then I got the big break, which was Mark Randolph. And Mark Randolph is the co-founder of Netflix.
Wow.
So once I had that changes everything, right? Because now, hi, we'd like to come on the podcast. We've interviewed the founder of Netflix before. Okay. So when people now get their email, like, oh, okay, cool. And then later I interviewed the founder of Twitter, Ev Williams. And then once let's say my little outreach to somebody, hi, I'd love to interview you for the podcast. I've interviewed over 150 people, including the founders of Netflix and Twitter. It doesn't matter how big you think you are or how much ego you have. You're like, okay, I'm like, at least hear this guy out, right?
Yeah.
And that's where standards had to keep increasing, because once you've had the founders of like multi-billion-dollar companies on, you can't just get anybody on the podcast because the audience would be really confused, right? You need to have that level of consistency. But the difficulty is in some ways, I think we talked about this before the podcast started, about the relatability aspect, because founder of Netflix and Twitter, actually really lovely guys. It's Mark Randolph and Ev Williams. And they spoke to it like for an hour after the podcast finished about like life with me and their regrets and all that sort of stuff. But for a lot of other people, let's say they've got, like we said, like the 50 million is a rough range of what you need in terms of funding to come on the podcast. They're not very relatable.
Yep.
The average person hasn't raised 50 million. And it's that law of big numbers, right? It's that for most people, being a millionaire versus being 20 million or 30 million or 50 million, it doesn't, it's too big for us to really scale in our heads. So while in the like hardcore business world, if your company's worth 10 million or 200 million, it's a huge difference.
Yep.
For every person, it doesn't really, it's not any more or less impressive. So we also have on big creators as well. So if you've got, and we'll get you on this one as well. So 100,000 followers on either LinkedIn or Twitter is our main one to go for, because that's our audience, right? Our audience is tech, startup, business kind of people. And those ones often actually do better, which is quite interesting, right? You think people who've got $100 million companies who don't come on podcasts very often would do very well, but sometimes they're just not very relatable, or people don't know who they are. And that's one of the weird things I think sometimes happens with advice, is that people take advice from somebody who's popular rather than somebody who's successful. Or let's say you want to start a $100 million company. Do you want to listen to the guy who's got 100,000 followers or the guy who's got a $100 million company?
They'll listen to 100,000 followers.
Yeah. And it's really interesting in that regard, right? And it's strange, because what I try to do is get people who've got both, because there's some people who've got both the big company and the big following. But it's one of the things I'm navigating at the moment is, okay, how do I keep this podcast relatable? Because it's very hard for people to comprehend raising that level of capital and having these massive ideas. But what I hope is some of these companies I've interviewed, let's say in a few of like 4 or 5 years' times, they're the next Twitter and Netflix. Which would be pretty cool, right? Because they're mid-stage. I say mid-stage, it's beyond my wildest dreams, having $300 million valuation or something like that. But for them, they're thinking we're going to have $300 billion in the future.
Yeah.
And that one, which is a very interesting learning curve, because that's where I learn the most from. It's my podcast. It's me asking the questions I want to know from the guest. So I'm just learning. That's the main way I learn now.
That was the whole kind of inspiration of this podcast as well. But I think when you're sitting in front of that huge people, I think the great thing is you can ask relatable questions, and that's what slightly maybe brings the relatability. But was that the spark of Bay HQ, like how you can bring on relatable guests, and especially in a Asian kind of community, which is the reason why you started that?
So it definitely plays into it, because what was happening is that, so one of my friends who I know for like 10 years, her fiance at the time was working in venture capital. And for me, venture capitalists are a gold mine, because I can get one venture capitalist on and then I get their portfolio companies on. Because that's one of the hard things, is getting podcast guests and reaching out to people. It's just a pain, right? And you'll discover that as you go for more and more episodes. So me and him were chatting, and like he's from like an Indian background as well. And we're saying like how we don't really know that many people like us who work in the business space, the startup space. And isn't that a shame? Like how, like, why is this? Like, why don't we get to meet each other more often? Why is there nobody organizing this kind of thing? And we had that idea of like, oh, we should do this ourselves then. Like, let's be the change that we want to see. And I also always complain about how often in our community we compete with each other rather than helping each other. And it just frustrates me so much, because I've got that experience with all these American guys out in Silicon Valley and stuff. And they're all telling me like, oh yeah, you should interview that guy. Oh, I'll put you in touch with this person. Oh yeah. And they just put me in touch with these people who are worth hundreds of millions like that. Whereas here, sometimes people are like, oh no, I'm not going to do that. Oh no, like, yeah, I'm not sure about that. So I've interviewed the founder of Netflix and Twitter. Like, I'm not going to embarrass you if you introduce me, right? And we say, why do people keep those cards so close to their chest? And if you're like, I always say, if somebody's done the work, I'll help them out. If somebody's coming at the beginning of their journey, like, oh, can I speak to the founder of Twitter? I can't do that, right? They need to have seen that you're doing something and you're really trying hard. But that was the idea behind it. And like you said there about the relatability aspect, is with Entrepreneur's Handbook, I live in London, right?
Yeah.
And I'm always interviewing people from Silicon Valley who are 8 hours behind me.
Yes.
It's always virtual. So I wanted that thing of like, I want to do something in person because I think that makes such a big difference. And also giving these different stories, because it's people like yourself you're young, you've like created a huge business based on like content and based on like modern technology and understanding how that works. And then we've got other people who've got more traditional businesses and having that variety and showing people what's possible. Whereas I think so often people think in one direction. We want to keep that different variety of episodes going on. So the podcast side of things was just, for me, it's just that Bay HQ. So Bay HQ stands for British Asian Entrepreneur as well. I didn't say. And it's podcast. It's like, what's my accumulated skills, right? I've done so many podcast episodes, so I can do a podcast easily.
Yeah.
How can I make this bigger, quicker? Is that I can interview people very easily, very quickly. I don't get nervous. I don't get worried about it. I can do the content to a very high level. I've been an editor. I've got an editor of a website that's had over 1 million views per month. And what it is, it's breaking the shackles. Because when I've done these other things, I've been working with other people. Now I'm in charge. So all of the things I couldn't do for those other brands, which I thought were going to help, I can now do.
You can do it yourself.
And I've got that full connection. And it also, when you look at motivation, when it's your own business or your own project versus when you're doing it for somebody else and it's your job, it's different. So now with the VHQ, like the passion, like the fire that's behind it is massive, because everything I'm doing is based on something I want to do and how I want to help people. And the motivation, we talked about my dad earlier. So my dad passed away in the summer. And while we were going to think about doing this idea anyway, when he passed away, that just like lit a massive fire under it, because now I'm dedicating it towards him because of, like I said, like how much he believed in me, which a lot of people don't have. So how can I create an organization that pays that forward, where I was privileged in that way to just have parents who believed in me and like wanted me to do well and wanted me to be happy. And some people don't have that. Yeah. Some people don't have the connections. They don't know people. They don't know whatever. But I'm in a very fortunate position in many ways to have that now.
Yeah.
How can I like spread that out? How can I really make a difference? And there's so much to come still as well, because the podcast is just, to me, it's just phase one. And it's the whole, in many ways, you must experience this as well, where at the beginning, there's imposter syndrome and stuff like that. Whereas now it's like, no, I'm like 3 years into this.
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing. I'm very good at what I do. I need to just smash it out.
And you can see so much far ahead as well.
Yeah.
What's the end goal for BHU?
Oh, there's so many things. So if we're looking at the next, because we're going by phases at the moment, right? So it's different 3 months.
Phase 1, phase 2.
So phase 1, I think officially finishes January 16th.
Okay.
Because that's the first 3 months. And the next 3 months, so the first 3 months about the podcast, getting the professionalism behind it. The next 3 months is the website is going to really be kicking off, where if you think about the medium background, that hasn't really come into play yet for the BHQ. Once that starts coming into play, we're going to get 1 million views on that website.
You're going to write articles.
Yeah, I'm going to start smashing that, because other people, and we talk, like we've got a mutual friend of Hassan and Ash, right? What's the unfair advantage is that there's very few people in this country who've written to the level I've written on the American platforms, right? And edited art, like publications as big as I have. And America is way more forward thinking than we are here. So things here lag. So if I can take that experience of dominating an American publishing area and bring it here, I can do things quicker than everybody else can do them. And people could try to do what I'm doing, but they won't be able to do it to the same standard, because I've got that expertise. I've got that. You can use like hire VAs, you can hire ChatGPT, you can use AI, whatever like that. You're not going to be able to write it as good as I can.
It won't be as standard.
Yeah, and that's not. It can come across as arrogant, but it's because of accumulation of experience.
And as you said, it's your unfair advantage.
It's my unfair advantage, yeah. And that's one aspect, is getting that website up massively. The podcast side, for example, so we've had some of the people we've had you on, obviously.
I was honored to be one.
A guy called Ravi Singh, who founded at Carcerate.
I saw that podcast.
Yeah. And there's some of the people coming on. We got shared by Alia Bhatt, so some of your listeners might know who she is.
Oh,
right?
Alia Bhatt, yes. Yeah. I saw that one, and I was like surprised as hell.
So that reel got 3 million views or whatever it is, and that was in our first 10 weeks. So to me, this is just laddering now, right? So I want like Rishi Sunak on. I want people like Ramesh Ranganathan. I want all these kind of A-listers to come on, the people who are behind the billion-dollar companies. And a year ago, 2 years ago, I would have thought, this guy's delusional, right? But it's the experience picking up, the work I'm putting in is going to get us to that level. And then what we're also doing behind the scenes is a lot of that side is the education side, right? So it's the BHQ part of it is a non-profit, right? So all the education that is non-profit is about how can we give back? So we need to earn enough in order to pay what we're doing and to keep going with it. And we also want to help people in terms of investment, because that's the other side we have. So my co-founder, Gervir, he's from a venture capital background. So we want to try and help people in like British Asian backgrounds to get funding. Because I don't know about you, if you like at the moment, how much do you know about funding? We don't know anything, right? Like,
if you tell me what like funding, when I think of funding, all I think of is like going to Dragon's Den and you're pitching your idea. That's
exactly,
all I know.
And that's the thing, is that there's this massive information gap where because people don't know about it, they don't try. And if we can close that like chasm and then also help people by using our connections in venture capital and get them funded, that's a big dream for me. Is can we get some people who never thought they'd be able to build the business? They've got an amazing idea. They've got the skills. Like I said, like they've got their unfair advantages, but they just don't know what to do. And that's not their fault. It's just we don't get taught this stuff. Like when do you ever get taught how to start a startup? So if we can get those people invested in, and that's kind of a longer term vision, is like how do we not only educate people, but also help them to make their dreams come true? That's the dream of this, right? It's like how do we help our community actually build what they want to build and build these organizations that are going to change the world and have the impact, right? Like I'd love for it to be somebody sitting, listening to the podcast in 5 years' time, they've created the next Netflix or Twitter or unicorn or whatever like that, right? And it's because we've been able to give them the information. And one of the key aspects of this for me is that it doesn't have to be about me. So I need to use my personal brand to get this off the ground and to get it going. But ideally in the future, it's about the organization, right? It's like Bay HQ is the people you need to go to help, rather than you need to go to me. You get to the organization. And it's a long-term impact. So after my dad passed away, some of his clients sent us like handwritten letters to say, oh, 20 years ago, my business nearly collapsed. Your dad like worked all around the clock and he saved a business. And that's the reason why I could put a roof over my kids' heads, why there was food on the table. And that's the kind of impact I want.
That
so my
unbeatable.
horizon is 20 years, 30 years. And that's the difference between what we're doing, say what a lot of other people are doing, is that this is just, to me, this is early days, right? The stuff we've done, cool, it's great, yeah. And we need to appreciate the goals and the wins we've had. But this is nothing. This is 20 years, 30 years time. Are we that organization that have helped some people build their dreams and like transform their lives? And again, it should, if this is about me, I've failed. If it's 30 years time, people are like, when they come on a podcast and they're a billionaire and they say, oh, what helped you in your early journey? It's like, oh, I listened to a podcast by the Bay HQ and that made me believe that I could do it. And then I went and did it. That's the dream. That's the longer term vision.
I love that so much, because right now, while I'm sitting here, I'm not Jets. I'm a 19-year-old kid trying to learn from you. So the whole thing about this Inspired Mind podcast is similar to like just educating the younger self of me, because I know there are 19-year-olds who want to start a business but don't know how to. And I think people like you can teach them. And so mine is not really niche down into the Asian community, but I think seeing you do that in the Asian community, that's what made me want to come on your podcast. And I loved your podcast so much. And that's why I was like, kind of, now I have started to listen to some of the podcasts in there as well. So what you're doing is fantastic. And I think the future thing you were discussing as well was doing events as well, which is one of your things. And I think I can definitely see BHQ doing really well in the long term. One thing which you mentioned about was losing your father. And I didn't read the article fully, but it was about how that changed your whole perspective in life. I haven't gone through anything like that yet, but what was a shift in your life like? How did everything change?
So I think I've always had very good self-awareness and I analyze myself a lot. And I think what happened is after my dad passed away, everything shifted because I knew what my tendency would be, right? I knew that if I allowed myself to, I would downward spiral. And that scared me, right? Because I know in many ways, a lot of the confidence I built up has been built up over time. When I was younger, I wasn't confident. I didn't have the guts. And if I didn't get back into things again, then there's a worry to me that I would be too afraid to do it again. So for example, getting in front of the camera now, if I let it go too long where I didn't start the podcast again, those first couple ones I did, my heart was like, I thought I was going to have a panic attack. My entire body was screaming, right? So I knew for myself I had to keep going. But then what keeps you going, right? Because it's essentially when something like that happens, it's like, what is the point of anything? And that was a question. If I allowed myself to really ponder on too much, it can just eat you out from the inside. So I needed to find something to really throw myself behind. Like, this matters, this is important, this is purposeful. And what I'd say is, before my dad passed away, the main drive of what I was doing was curiosity, right? And we'll talk about experiments of, oh, this is fun, like, let me try this, oh, let me try that, that's cool. Whereas now, that side of things, it's curiosity can't, when it's a crisis, it fails, right? Because when you're in a crisis mode, you don't have those interests as much. You're not like, well, let me try that, let me try this out. Because you're in that place where it's just, you don't have that excitement anymore, right? And that's what I could see was going to happen. So I talked about like 4 key motivators of people in the article, right? So it's necessity, which is like, you need to eat, you need to do whatever. And most people listening to this podcast, they're probably past that, right? Like, you've got enough to be safe, I'd hope at least, right? Then the main driver for most people, and I think it was a drive for me for most of my life, is insecurity. You're doing it to prove yourself, or because you don't think you're worthy enough, or because you want people to think of you in a certain way, or you need to prove you're strong, or toxic masculinity, whatever it is. That's been a massive driver. And even for a lot of entrepreneurs I've interviewed, they'd admit that's the reason why they're doing what they're doing, or why they did what they did. It's because they needed to prove to their parents, they needed to prove to themselves, or they were bullied at school and they needed to show people. And that can get you to a certain place, but it's not healthy. You've got to have these other things. And what I consider the healthy ones are curiosity, which we've talked about, and then having a mission. And mission is what most people consider as your purpose in life, right? Yes. Which I don't like that idea, because it puts so much pressure on you to have that one purpose. But purpose and having that really deeper meaning is what keeps you going in a crisis, right?
And fulfillment as well.
Yeah. It gives you that really deep sense of satisfaction. And for me, that mission became, okay, the Bay HQ was going to be launched anyway before my dad passed away. But once he passed away, it's okay, this is now dedicated towards him. If I can help other people, then it's his memory, his legacy. That's a mission for me that will keep me going, right? Because if I'm doing this for my dad, there's no way I'm giving up. And that is what kept me sane in many ways, and it kept me going in the last few months. Because the mission is now, okay, I always come back to the people always like tell me for saying this, but so much of what I've done is luck. Of like, you create your own luck, yes, but I'm lucky to be born in like London.
Yep.
I'm lucky to have parents who cared about me. A lot of people don't have that. I went to a good school. I got to go to university. Like, the random people I've met, even the thing of my first article going viral, right? There's only things outside your control. What matters is how do you seize those opportunities. But you can only seize those opportunities if you've been put in a position where they're available.
Yes.
And some people don't have that. So how do I increase that surface area where I can create opportunities for other people and give them the motivation, give them the potential connections? It's like to work with events, right? Events can become a huge part of it once we've got that set up, because then it puts like your 19-year-old who's got the big dreams but doesn't really know what they're doing in the room with the person who's got $1 billion business, right? And we're trying to work out, how do we do that effectively? How do we get the right people in the room at the right times?
Yeah.
But that mission side of things is what's driving me now. And I think what you should do in life is go through different phases where the mission and curiosity, because if you stick to the same mission, when it no longer serves you, you can then become unhappy. So it's trying to have that balance between curiosity, experimenting, and having a purpose.
How do you find your purpose?
I think in many ways, you shouldn't try. You should experiment. So what we talk about experimentation, you don't try to do something in the idea that's going to be your purpose, because that's too much pressure. It's, say, for example, with like dating, right? If you're dating somebody, like, they've got to be the one, you just ruin that thing because you've put too much pressure on it. So how do you do it in like lower stakes? You've always got to make things lower stakes. For me, the purpose came out of this crisis. And sometimes that's what's going to happen, right? Because when there's a crisis of confidence, of like family, whatever it is, then a purpose will start illuminating itself. If you just go searching for it, it's harder, right? So what I'd say to most people is, if you want to try and find a purpose, first you try and find stuff that you enjoy. And then that might develop into a purpose. And the other thing, so I've talked about one of my like most viral articles about ikigai. Have you heard of ikigai?
Yes, I made a video yesterday about it, which is going to go out next week.
Oh, I might be disproving it here. So what most people think about ikigai is the 4 Venn diagram, like 4 cycles in Venn diagram, right?
What you do, what you love to do, and blah blah blah.
That's not ikigai. So that's from an English, like an American book, where the guy's talking about different stuff, and the illustrator he had to come up with an image. And he just copied a Venn diagram from Susanna's theory of purpose. It's a Spanish philosopher, right? And then he just relabeled it ikigai. And he's gone on record and said, like, this is what I did. I didn't think it would blow up. But that Venn diagram has gone viral over the last 10 years. The actual Japanese concept of ikigai is, like, think about it. If you're a Japanese Zen Buddhist, would you say as your purpose in life is how you make money?
Yeah.
Right? That's a very Western idea. What ikigai is your reasons to live.
Yes.
So that could be...
That's the I literally remember the meaning from yesterday as well.
Yeah. And your reasons to live could be your morning coffee in the morning, right? That makes you happy. It could be your pets. It could be your family. It could be the view you get. It could be like your runner's high. It's reasons, not reason.
Oh,
the idea of having a soul life purpose has been misappropriated from the ikigai concept. And the life purpose idea is generally very common with like that. But what we see is people use, when something sounds foreign, mystic, it makes it sound more intelligent in some ways, right?
Yes.
But the actual ikigai concept, even like actual people in Japan don't really think about it that much as we think they do. It's just been kind of like, here people talk about it all the time, and people in Japan like, yeah. And because I always wonder like why somebody from Japan doesn't just be like, you're just misappropriating our stuff. It's just because they're not really paying attention so much. And I don't think it's healthy in many ways to try to find a life purpose. It's if a life purpose comes to you, and that's great, do it. Make yourself happy, right? Otherwise, what you should be doing is following your curiosities.
Yeah.
Because from your curiosities, one of them might end up being a purpose. One of them might not. But you don't need to find it. And in different periods of your life, you might find you've got a purpose and that's really driving you. But then that purpose might not be it forever. And for example, often used is like Nelson Mandela, right? Nelson Mandela's purpose was to end the apartheid.
Yeah.
But after the apartheid ended, did he just cease to exist? Did he just not care anymore? No, like you find different things.
Yeah.
And that's a really important thing where don't try to create your story for the next 60 years today, because who the hell are you to decide that, right? It's like when you try to decide your career when you're 16 years old. Like you don't have the right to tell yourself in some ways these different things. And even, for example, I'm saying the long-term mission with AHQ 20, 30 years time, it might be that I step away from that in some ways. It could be that I'm not really part of that anymore, but I've set the organization that's able to do that because my life or whatever is important to me at the time changes.
Yes.
And it's allowing yourself to change is so important, because let's say 19-year-old Jats decided his most important thing in life is that he's going to become a Red Cross doctor or something like that, right? If you don't do that, then you just feel guilty for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happened to some people, is that they had this idea that when they were 18, they were going to do this and they haven't done it. And they just feel guilty about it. So, well, do you actually even want to do that anymore? And if you don't, that's fine. Your life, what you consider your purpose can change.
Yeah.
And it's just this idea, I think it can put so much pressure on people to have a purpose, where it's like, just, if you don't know what your purpose is, allow curiosity to guide you instead.
I now understand why you said you're very self-aware, because the thing which you just mentioned, I think gave me, even though I'm 23 now, not the 19-year-old, gave me so much perspective in terms of like finding purpose. So to the video yesterday I made, it was actually I used ikigai not to find my purpose. I was trying to find my purpose, couldn't find my purpose, but there is a Venn diagram link of what you like and what you are passionate about, and that what you love is what you're passionate about. So that's how I figured out my passion, which was content creation, and it's still going on. But I think now I have a complete different view of what ikigai is. But before I move on to the 7 deep inspired mind questions, which is the last part of the podcast, you, I think, briefly mentioned on your About Me bio was that you from young age you had anxiety and insecurity, and I think later on in life you also faced a lot of burnouts when you tried doing things and everything. So first part about anxiety and insecurity, how did you overcome that?
It's interesting because it's only now that I can say I was anxious and I was insecure. You don't say it at that time, right? Especially coming from the background I came from.
I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, exactly. You don't, if you're anxious or insecure, you're just weak, is the way I would have seen it at the time, right? We didn't have the enlightenment we have now. And maybe some people listening are still in that situation, right? When I was at school, it was if you were anxious or insecure, that made you a target. So you don't show that. And I'm thinking about how did I overcome that over time, and parts of it were like you grow up and things change. But I think a large part of it came down to in my mid-20s, and I think it's what almost set me on my path now, is that some of the most popular people I knew, I started finding out about traumas they'd faced or their anxiety or their problems, and
you
it blew my mind.
You realize how small yours are.
Yeah, it's less that, and also just that I always thought of it as people who are successful don't have this stuff. People who are strong don't have this. Whereas what I've realized now is that people who are strong or seem strong, especially, they've got so much going on and they're able to do things anyway. And that's what I think really changed for me, is just the idea that actually, no, like the things that I'm scared about or worried about, that doesn't make me lesser. It's more about like, isn't that great that you're still being able to like function and do those different things? And it's funny because understanding that other people feel that way makes your own burden less.
Yes.
And what I tell people as well, like pretty much every single problem you have, somebody else has.
Yes.
Right. So it's whether you've got obviously people have medical conditions, right? There are other people who have those conditions too. So if you think about that kinship between you, other people are going through what you're going through. And it's really important, I think, for people to realize like they're never alone.
Yep.
It's very, very like exceptionally rare for someone to used to be the only person in the world with that problem. And it doesn't mean that it just solves magically. But I think sometimes acknowledging, okay, like I'm really stressed out about my business, but there's thousands of other entrepreneurs that are stressed about their business too. That just makes you realize, okay, like this is okay, this is normal. And it's weird, by normalizing it,
yes,
it makes it feel less painful. And I think that's a huge part for me, yeah.
Not many people in this world understand that not a single human being out there, 8 billion people out there, don't have a problem. Every single one of us go through something, whether that's, okay, me as an entrepreneur, but someone might be going through in a job. Every one of us have a problem. And I think the way you just stated it there was perfect.
It's one of the things I dislike about a lot of traditional content creation, is that people try to make themselves seem impenetrable and perfect. And it's like, for example, the whole idolization of Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, like you don't want to be those people. Those people don't live good lives. They're terribly stressed out, but they get put on a pedestal. And I think it's really important for even people listening right now, don't put me on a pedestal. Don't put you on a pedestal either, right? It's just, we're people who've got different problems and different anxieties and different worries. And instead be impressed about like how we've able to still go on despite that. We're never going to fix that, right? And people have this idea, you read a book and then it solves all your problems in life, and people portray their books in that way. It's never going to be you get to this enlightenment stage or where you don't care anymore. And also, I don't think I'd ever want to be in that position, because if you reach that stage where nothing can bother you, then it's also nothing can really make you happy either.
Yep.
You've got to have that bit of a roller coaster of life. The ups and downs are part of what makes us human and parts of what makes life so rich, right?
Yeah. And the part about burnouts as well, I think kind of you answered it previously, which was really nice, is that having a source of fulfillment. I don't know if that's the way you would say that, not feeling burnt out could be that, but I last year burnt out. Every 3 weeks I would have a burnout. And I thought it was because I was overworking, but sometimes I felt like it was because I was doing the things not because I wanted to do it, but because I had to do it. Mm-hmm. How did you face your burnouts and overcome them?
So I'd also question on that, because I think a lot of people say this as well, where I need to do this. And generally you have a choice. So you're choosing to do it.
But what if it's money choice? So like, as you said, for being a ghostwriter is like, you don't need to do this, but sustainable.
It's the whole thing of empowering yourself. It's like, I'm choosing to do ghostwriting for the money, despite it not. And it's also being honest with yourself about that, right? So rather than saying I need it to do the money, it's like, I don't need it to do the money. I'm choosing to do it because I want the money. And it changes the thing of when I'm honest with myself about that. Yeah. And then when you say it in that way, it's like, does that sit right with me? Because when you say you need to do it, it's making it seem like it's out of your control. It's in my control. I can choose not to do it. And if, for example, you're choosing to do a job you're unhappy in because that's giving you security and that security is important to you, then own that. That's okay. But as long as you're honest with yourself, like you're choosing to do it because it gives you security and that security is important to you, and that's completely acceptable.
Yeah.
And sometimes people have a guilt about doing a job they're not happy in when it's giving them the lifestyle outside of their work that they love. So, and that's okay, right? It's like, you don't need to feel guilty about stuff if you're choosing to do something that overall makes your life better.
Yeah.
Say, for example, you've got a job and that allows you to feed your kids, then you can feel like proud of that, right? Like, be proud of it. It's just because you're not on TV or anything like that, it doesn't mean your life is any lesser.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the burnouts, what I found is the amount of pressure I put on myself is a big part of it.
Mm.
And my obsession in improving, and just, I think it's, I enjoy it, but then it's the whole thing. I gave the cooking analogy earlier, right? So I use it again of where sometimes what we do is we do stuff which fulfills us to some level, but we do too much of it. And it's like cookies, right? You have one cookie, tastes great. You have 10 cookies, feels good, you feel a bit sick. You have 100 cookies, you're going to be sick, right?
Yeah.
And that's what a lot happens when people put themselves into boxes saying they need to do this, they need to do that, rather than adapting and listening. And I think a big part of how I'm stopping burning out now is being much more adaptive and receptive and listening to myself of, okay, instead of I decide I'm going to do this week and I'm going to do it no matter what. It's like, okay, actually, this is less important. This is more important. So I'm going to shift. And I think that reviewing what's important to you constantly, rather than some people do an annual review, right? You change so much over the year. Even I made my, like, a rough plan in 2023 last week. It's already, I'm thinking, actually, no, thinking about it, I think this is more important now. And I'm going to shift it.
Yeah.
So allowing yourself to change your goals and to change your meaning and what's your priorities, I think avoids burnout, because you allow yourself to adapt rather than forcing yourself into a rigid plan that doesn't actually suit your reality.
That's nice. And with goals, I think most people nowadays believe in quarterly goals as well, because 1 year is too long and you don't know what's going to happen in 1 year. I really like that about burnouts as well. I think that can really relate with me, because I always put pressure on myself. Like, I need to do this. I can take rest. But that was a great conversation, by the way. I want to now jump onto the 7 deep inspired mind questions. And question 1 is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I think it probably goes back to my dad of just back yourself. And it's fortunate in some ways. I built up the skills. I built the different things now. It's give it a go. And it's the whole thing of what's the worst that could happen. Because if, let's say it's all of this fails, it's whatever like that, I go and get a job again. Have I failed? No, because that's what I would have been doing anyway. So just give it a go, right?
That's the part I don't get with people, is like, look, if business doesn't work out, just get a job and you're still going to succeed. You can reach the corporate ladder by the time you're like 40 years old. You will still be making a good amount of money. So why not just give it a try? That's a really good piece of advice by your dad. The second question is, what's the worst piece of advice you ever received?
Oh, I think fake it till you make it is one I particularly hate. And what I think it's people use in different aspects, right?
I use in a different aspect. So I was just thinking in that sense.
If it's in terms of confidence, and you want to project the confidence because that confidence then enables you to get more things, great. If it's a lie and pretend you've done something you haven't done in order to get a client, in order to get something or to get things going, that's what I don't like. And I see that quite a lot in business where people pretend that they've done better results than they have. And I say, well, then when you get the client, they're going to realize that you're not as good as you say you are. And it's even in terms of personal relationships as well. I always have this thing. I try not to, like, I don't lie as much as possible. I don't intentionally lie. Sometimes you say stuff and you realize, oh, that's maybe stretching. But just being transparent and honest, I think gets you way further than pretending to be somebody you're not. And with the fake it till you make it in terms of confidence, you're still being you. It's just, you're not just like squashing yourself up, right? But when it's fake it till you make it, like, oh, acts like you've done all these deals that you haven't done. That's what I don't like. I prefer people with integrity over people who like scam people, basically. And that's just, the scammers always get found out. I don't know anybody who's got to a very, very high level sustainably by lying. All of those people at the top, they're vulnerable, they're real, they're humans.
I think the part which I use fake it till make it is for me, I always have this thing of like manifestation. Like, I don't know if it's fake it till we make it, but I have to be at the frequency I want to be at, the way I think and the way I talk, so that I'm projecting to who I want to be from in my present, and that will allow me to kind of reach there. So in my personal growth, it's had a huge impact. But I think when I started doing that, it also kind of creates 2 personalities, and sometimes you're tired of being the second person. And so now it's just kind of, I just be me, like flipping, trying to project myself 5 years ahead from now and thinking I want to get there. And it did help me, but sometimes it's too much for me as well. So I think that was a good piece of advice there as worst piece of advice which you have received. Question number 3 is, what is your definition of success?
Oh, this is the one that's constantly adapting. It's the whole thing of doing things because I have to do them. I don't have to do anything, right? So I'm choosing to do things and I'm happy with those choices. If I'm happy with the choices I'm making in life, to me, that's success. I'm spending my time with the people I want to spend my time with and on the projects I want to spend my time on. So to me, it's not monetary based. It's not how many hours I can or how many countries I can travel to. It's about, am I living every day?
Yeah.
And I think
nice
that's
one.
sometimes what people don't do is they make the success based on a number or an achievement or a goal. Where to me, a success is lifestyle is, are you living something which is making you happy and driving you forwards? And it's that day-to-day life rather than that one point in time.
I love that because it kind of refers to fulfillment. Are you really fulfilled? Because for me, that's the definition of my success, being fulfilled. The next question was, what was the hardest moment in your life?
So I think it comes back to my dad's, right? So it's this entire period since my dad passed away I was thinking about this earlier about, I always had that final escalation point in some ways. So I had my own place for 4 years. I've done my own businesses. But when things got out of control or where I was really scared or nervous or whatever like that, I always had my dad to go to for advice. Whereas now I don't have that anymore. So it's stepping into that role of that final escalation point has been a journey, and it's something I'm not probably there yet either. And it's kind of killing the last part of like childishness in me in some ways. And it's one of those things I don't know how I feel about it, but it's something which I'm adapting to and trying to just do the best for me and my family. And that's, I never thought, I hope not to be in this position for a very long time, and now it's here.
Yeah.
So it's just trying to adapt.
This is a question, not on the deep questions, but do you think you have any regrets, which, because you chose the kind of entrepreneurship path where you're not able to spend a lot more time, do you think you have any regrets? Because I always have that in the back of my head, like, will I have any regrets for not spending time right now?
I think what was good in terms of spending time with family.
Spending time, or maybe, sometimes you're too lost in your world, in your entrepreneurial world, that you forget to be in the present.
I think that's definitely a risk, and it's quite hard to do because in order to succeed as an entrepreneur, you've got to really love what you're doing. And by really loving what you're doing, you're thinking about it all the time. And what I always say is, like, I need to do the social life stuff because that's the only time where I can properly switch off. If I'm just sitting at home by myself, I will be thinking about work
all the time.
And it's tough because you say you give yourself a day off. If I don't do something on that day off, I'm just going to still basically be working.
You're not wrong.
And in terms of regrets, I don't think I do. I think I haven't even thought about, there's no way, if for example, I was still doing my day job now, I can't even imagine that. It just feels like such a foreign concept. If I had to do that again now, I'd be like, what am I doing? I can't remember anything. Yeah. But that is that constant struggle, I think, in the future of making sure I am present and making sure I am being different. And one of the things I really try to do, which I know a lot of people don't, and it's another worst piece of advice I've heard, is this idea of you shifting your friends based on where you are in life. Because if you lose those friends from your earlier life who knew the earlier versions of you and have seen you grow over time, they're the ones who really know you. Some of the people that meet me now, they have a certain impression of me where they don't fully understand all the different depths of my personality. Yeah. Because they don't really understand what I was like before. If you knew me when I was anxious and when I was insecure and all those kind of things, you then understand how that transition has happened. And I think that's really important for people generally, if you're doing entrepreneurship, if you're a content creator, stuff like that, is stop this stupid idea of you're the average of the first five people you spend most time with, if that's not based on kindness.
Yes.
If it's based on, I want to be on the average of the people because they're good people, great, do it. If it's, I want to spend time with 5 people who are uber successful and make loads of money, what's that going to turn you into? What kind of person are you if that's what you're basing who you spend your time with versus people who are kind and compassionate, people who are just, you believe are good people, and we all have different definitions of what that is. But that's who I want to spend my time with. Yes, I talk to these famous people, entrepreneurs, stuff like that, but it's not mixing that up with, if they're a bad person, they're not my friend. It's make sure the friends and the people I spend most of my time with are the ones who I actually believe care and are good people. And because sometimes this could all collapse. If you're only friends with people because how successful they are, and they're only friends with you because how successful you are, they're gone.
Yeah.
Right. And then you've neglected those people who actually cared about you because you're so busy chasing these other people to be impressive. And some guys try to do and make sure I'm sticking around and making sure I'm trying to organize dinners and stuff like that and catch up with my friends.
I like that. I like that a lot. It's given me so much about like the 5 people you, because I'm always thinking about in that perspective, and I'm like, does that really kind of relate to me as a person? Do I want to be that? It's giving me really good insights right now. The next question is, what's your biggest regret in life?
I think it's not backing myself earlier.
Yeah.
I think I waited too long and was too scared and too nervous and too afraid to do things. And then once I actually gave it a go, I realized it's not as scary. It's like I came back to it's not as scary as you think it is. And obviously, there's still moments where I doubt myself and still moments the imposter syndrome gets a bit overwhelming. But imagine if I backed myself 10 years ago, or if I backed myself when you decided to back yourself, right?
Yeah.
And how much more fulfilled would I have been and how much less pain would I have had if I'd just gone a bit earlier and really been like, yeah, I can do this. And I think it's a battle that a lot of people are facing now, right?
I feel that because even though I started at 19, I was like, why didn't I start at 17, 16 or something like that?
And it is the best day to start is yesterday, but this next best day is tomorrow. Today, yeah. Can't remember the quote now, but yeah, you get the idea. Yeah.
Exactly. The next question is your top 3 self-help book, which has helped you to become who you are today.
Okay, so books-wise, I'm trying to think of different ones. So it's not necessarily a self-help book, but Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari.
Okay.
I think had a huge effect on the way I think about the world and how people think. So one of the things it talks about in there is how so much of who we are is based on the stories that we were told when we were growing up. And what we see in the world in the moment is people who are so entrenched in their beliefs.
Yes.
And they see other people as evil. And it's going on right now in politics and different things, and like vegans versus meat eaters, Labour versus Tory, like Democrat versus Republican. And it's not that simple as good and evil. It's about if you grew up in an area, or you grew up and your parents told you this was this, or your friends thought in this way, that's why people think the way they do.
Yes.
It's not because they're inherently evil or bad people. And when you understand that, that can change the entire way you look at different people. And it means you're less hateful towards the world. Because, okay, the problem isn't there are so many bad people out there. It's the problem is people have different stories, and how do we change narratives, and how do you can challenge ideas, and you can change ideas, and it makes it give you hope, right? If you can change your ideas, you can change how people think, and you can change their stories. If people are just bad, you're stuck, right? And it's that another thing I talk about is how some people they have a growth mindset, right? And how we can change and adapt, but then talk about how other people are fixed. I was like, well, you don't have a growth mindset then, right? Because you don't believe people can change. You just believe that you're better than everybody else and you can change and everybody else can. And I think it's part of that killing that ego comes from that book of like, actually, yeah, I'm who I am today because the stories I was told.
Yes.
Okay, second book. So one of the problems for me with this is because of the writing I do, then I basically rip apart every book I read. So trying to think of good books that I recommend is quite difficult sometimes. Let me think for a sec.
No worries. I think the first one's already an amazing banging book, which I'm out to give it a read as well.
Yeah. I know that I've written a story. Oh, okay. Another one is When Breath Becomes Air by, I'm going to butcher his last name, Paul Calayan. So find that. I might have got his last name wrong. So When Breath Becomes Air, it's about a neurosurgeon when he finds out. So he was like very, very successful, very, very driven. And then he finds out he's got terminal cancer himself. And it's the story of those last 9 months of his life. He writes about his thoughts about what's important, what's not important, and how he made mistakes in different areas. And hearing that story from somebody who in many ways has some of the traits that I had and maybe some of the listeners had about striving for success so badly. But then when it came to it and he was going to die, what actually mattered to him, what was actually important, how did he want to spend those last hours and this last time? And it's so much of it came down to the people around him and the being present in the moment. It's like we just talked about, right? And it's just, yeah, you can become a millionaire. Cool. If you've got nobody who genuinely cares about you to share in that success with, how much is that worth? And that's what some of that story is about, is how he neglected so many people in his life. And when everything came down to it, that's what he really cared about. And that's what his legacy is going to be. And that's what really was important to him. So that's another eye-opening book, I think, especially for people who are very, very driven, is to think about, like, you need to have that balance. Okay, now third book, think. Yeah, the final book is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And it's a book that I actually read when I was still in school. And again, it comes down to this idea, and it's how do you stop yourself from your self-delusion, right? And overthinking things. And it's also showing how irrational we all are so many times. Because one of the problems with entrepreneurs is that we have to have this self-delusion in some ways actually to do what we're going to do. And if we doubt ourselves too much, we just don't actually get anything done. But at the same time, we need to be aware of our different biases. And especially if you're going to be investing as well, it's really useful to know yourself and be able to analyze yourself in that way. And that's what that book is really good at doing, because it can tell you, okay, you're making these decisions and you're so confident in them, but have you considered that you're making that decision because of this? And when you're thinking about like your finances, all that kind of stuff as well, it's really useful to have that information to make sure you're doing it from you're going to be irrational, but if you can spot yourself out and call yourself out on that, that helps a lot.
I like that a lot. So I think those three books are completely different to what I expected it, but I think those are the first two I definitely need to read. And Thinking Fast and Slow has been on my reading list for a long time, so I definitely need to give that a read as well. The last and final question is, what are the 3 habits that got you where you are right now?
So I think one of the biggest habits is actually changing my habits.
Okay.
So the fact that I haven't just stuck to, because sometimes what people do is be really consistent, but then they're consistent in things that don't actually matter to them anymore. It's the whole thing what I say about reassessing, right? So that habit of actually being like, am I just doing this because I said I was going to do it, or because it's actually helping me do what I'm going to do? That's been a really important one, where having that ability to break my habits has actually been a key habit, if that makes sense. Another one which I actually broke for a while after my dad passed away, but every week I'd write down 10 things I was grateful for minimum. And a lot of people talk about daily gratitude practice, right? Which is great if you're a like perfect person. None of us, like, I don't know that many people who actually do that every single day, who live normal lives. And if it's different, if you've got tons of money and you've got all the free time in the world, you can write that every day, and you don't have a social life and stuff. But for the average person, it's quite hard to maintain a daily habit. You break it for a few days and then it's over with, right? Whereas what I do is every Saturday morning when I wake up, it's also good because it's procrastination. So I have my book next to my bed, get my book out, and I just write down 10 things I'm grateful for. And when I look back at that now, it's a great way for me to just have those memories. So I can look through like, oh, what happened in this month? Oh, that was great. That was this week. And it brings back those positive memories.
Similar to journaling, but kind of just with 10 things.
And it's complex, that what's making it as easy as possible, right? If I was to journal every day, I could say I'm going to do it, but I probably would break it. And once you've broken it for a few days, it's hard to keep up. But later on, so that's why I consider that weekly habit is really important. And sometimes it's also being real with yourself about how often you can do things. Because a lot of people now, it's like January, right? I don't know when it's coming out, but they say, I can do this every single day. And they break it and then it's done.
They've already broke it, I guess. It's 5 days in and probably most are broken.
Okay, then the final habit, I've done different methods of doing to-do lists, right? Where sometimes it's in a book, sometimes it's in a Notion, whatever like that. But what I do every day at the beginning is actually look at what I put on my to-do list and readjust it.
According to priorities.
But also if this doesn't actually make sense to do on this day anymore, then move it across. And I think that's a big thing, because a lot of people make this to-do list. So some people have this idea of making a to-do list the night before, then you plan it out, where I always have a million tasks, so I put them out across over the week, right? And what I do is always reassess that, like, okay, this is what I'm meant to be doing today. Does that still make sense or not? And then I can shift it across. And having that like routine of analyzing my own to-do list and what's important on that day has been really helpful. Because if I just try to force myself to do what's on my to-do list from yesterday's decisions, it might not make sense. And having that adaptability I think is a huge thing.
I think that's a really nice habit, which I have been actually doing as well, because I would have a long to-do list, but if I just follow it according to the way it is, I will not get the things which are important right now. And one thing about habits, before we end the podcast, I think most people create habits by looking at other people's habits, which work for them because that's what's important to them. But you need to look at yourself and be like, what are the habits I need to create to reach the goal I have set for myself? And that's kind of one thing I want to leave everyone listening and watching the podcast with, because this was an incredible podcast for myself in terms of how much self-awareness you gave me and things I could learn. So thank you so much, Amar, for joining us. By the way, guys, Amardeep's social medias as well as his podcast, and I'm even going to leave his Medium profile link in the description if you're on YouTube, or in the notes on podcast if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you so much for joining, and Amar, once again, thank you so much, and it was incredible. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed this, and it's great to be on the other side of this table as well.
Yes, I think we switched roles from the other day as well. But yeah, thank you so much.